Welcome to our RISE training for the administration of benchmark and interim assessments, as well as mid-year summatives. I am Elise Fry, the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with USBE. I'm joined today by a few colleagues from USBE, as well as some of our representatives from CAI, our vendor for RISE. They will be offering support by monitoring the chat and responding to any other items as needed. This training is being recorded and will be posted to our assessment YouTube channel in the next few days. I am hopeful that I will be able to share the recording link with you in next week's AD memo as well. I will also check and work with Emily Ing, our support specialist, to share this slide deck with you through Midas. That way, if you registered to attend the training, a PDF link for these slides will appear where you actually found the Zoom link for attending today. If you aren't familiar with my trainings, I do build in question breaks as we transition between topics, but you're welcome to drop questions in the chat at any time and we can address those as they come in. Just know that odds are I will have a dedicated time for your question. We just might not be to that section yet. Okay. So with that, today we're going to go through the RISE portal and look at all the types of tests provided, how to access the resources like the TAM, the TIDE user guide, things like that. We'll go through TIDE. We'll also look at TDS, which is the test delivery system, and the administration interface, as well as reporting. After all of that, there will also be some remote specific guidance for any of you that choose to stay on for that. So if you are participating in remote administration, there's a section at the very end just for you. I'm hoping after our time together today, you feel more comfortable training the other users in your LEA, as well as providing support for them with the RISE system as you go throughout the school year. So to begin, if you are not currently receiving portal updates from RISE, I would encourage you to subscribe on the portal. Just go to utahrise.org and click the second button at the bottom of the screen. Once you've registered, you will receive email notifications whenever a resource is updated or an announcement is published to the portal. Within the RISE system, there are 4 types of tests, and we're going to look at each of them individually in a bit. But first, we're going to look at their availability. So the training tests are always available. They are the very best way for students to build familiarity with both the system functionality and the item types. The training tests, however, should never be used to measure content knowledge or abilities. Okay. The training tests are also required to be used just prior to any other RISE administration test for students who are testing in a remote setting. This just is a way to ensure that all technology is working as expected before they start a test that's a little more high stakes than a training test. The benchmark availability is almost all school year. Note there will be a few new ELA benchmarks as well as writing benchmarks that become available in November. Benchmark modules are fixed form assessments, meaning students answer the same items and they're designed to be administered in one sitting, not over the course of multiple days. This is so they give teachers and students an opportunity to identify strengths and weaknesses regarding specific knowledge, skills, and abilities as they relate to the core. The number of items on each benchmark module differ, though, depending on content area and the differing DOK levels. But it's important to also understand that items are weighted differently in those benchmark modules. With the modules, though, they can be taken multiple times if you're looking to show growth. Okay, participation is not required, and reporting is really only provided for LEA and school use. USBE does not collect and store the reporting that's done with the benchmarks. A list of available benchmark modules is available on the RISE portal, but keep in mind, these are not meant to be predictive of how students will perform on RISE Summative, but they can be administered remotely using the secure browser just like the other assessments. The benchmark module preview directory allows teachers to view items on each benchmark prior to administration to determine which ones best align with their instructional goals for their classroom. Okay. This previewing capability, though, is not to be used with students. So please keep that in mind. Okay. Results are reported for benchmark modules as raw scores, and they can be shared with students. Teachers can also review classroom level responses in a whole class setting, but considerations are going to need to be made to protect PII and how to provide instruction for students with parental exclusion, as well as maintaining the security of the items. Just know that with these benchmark previews, teachers cannot copy or paste or photograph test questions, prompts, or reading passages into any other type of presentation or assessment, or even record themselves while reviewing those. For interim tests, RISE interims are also optional. Participation in these assessments is determined locally. Like the benchmark modules, student results are provided for the LEA and school use, but not collected by USBE. Um, just a little note here, though, due to changes in the core and enhancements being made, the ELA interim assessment availability is also set for November. Math is currently open and available for you. Students may participate in one grade level interim per subject in the fall, and then another grade level interim per subject in the winter. Interim assessments are adaptive, meaning different questions are given to students based on previously answered questions. Results of interim assessments can be considered predictive of summative performance, though, so that's kind of a neat thing to have. It is not recommended that schools administer both benchmark modules and interim assessments, though, because they share the same item bank, meaning students could have exposure to the same questions multiple times. So keep that in mind. If you are toying with whether you are going to use interim assessments or benchmark modules, there is a difference in that respect, and we don't encourage you to use both. You try to do one or the other. The interim assessments are also permitted to be administered remotely as well using the secure browser if you are a school who does all of your learning in a remote setting. With the interim reporting, results are reported with scale scores and proficiency levels and can be shared with students. Like the benchmarks, teachers can review classroom level responses in a whole class setting, but again, considerations need to be made to protect student information, and teachers still cannot copy, paste, or photograph these items or move them to another LMS system for administration. It's important to note another difference here in that the items on the interim cannot be reviewed prior to students taking the test because of that adaptive functionality, because each student's items are assigned real time based on their responses. Where would we find information about the weight of questions? Christine, I'm honestly not sure if there is guidance for the weight of questions. What you can do in reporting is it will show you how many points an item was worth, and that will give you an idea about the weight of the item if you're looking for the benchmark weighting. For summative assessments, these are designed to assess the knowledge, skills, and abilities described in the Utah Core Standards for ELA, writing in grades 5 and 8, math, and science. So blueprints are provided on the RISE portal, but the summative items and stimuli are not able to be reviewed with students. They can't be discussed as a class, and they're not reviewed during instructional conversations. Remote administration, though, for summative assessments will continue to be provided for students who receive 100% of their instruction online. However, just like last year, if a student is enrolled in even one brick and mortar course, for any reason, they are expected to test in person. Okay. And just like last year, this includes secondary math 1 and our science tests. More information is provided in the TAM as there's specific remote guidance, which differs slightly from standard administration, but hopefully we'll be able to hit on some of that at the end of our training today as well. So now this is one of those things I've seen an increase in issues with over the last year or so. Even though it's always mentioned in trainings, it doesn't seem to translate down to our teacher level users. So as you're taking notes, this is one of those things to make sure that your teachers are aware of. It's important to know that even within the parameters that you set with your testing windows, our testing opportunities have an expiration date. Okay, so when a test expires, it becomes unavailable to the students even if they weren't finished. So if the test opportunity isn't completed within its allotted time frame, it will expire, meaning the student will no longer have access to make changes or complete their work for submission. If a test expires and the student needs to access it again, if it's an interim or a summative test, you will have to fill out a test appeal request. Benchmarks, however, don't worry about test appeals with benchmarks, okay? Because these can be taken as many times as the teacher chooses. If the first attempt isn't completed within that 7 days, the student will just need to start over as their previous work is no longer active. The benchmark modules are designed to be given in one sitting anyway, so it shouldn't take multiple testing sessions for those to be completed. When it comes to the interim and summative tests, if you work as an assessment director, it is also your responsibility to approve or deny those test appeal requests as they come in. More information is provided in the TIDE user guide, and we'll actually go over this process in greater detail during our winter training to prep for spring summative administration, since that's when the bulk of your test appeals will come in. Last year, we worked to provide more clarification in the TAM as well as the RISE calculator manual regarding calculator use. I would recommend sharing this with your math teachers, especially those who work with students in grades 6 through 8, but it's a good reminder for all users. Calculators are not allowable for students in grades 3 through 5, and only scientific handhelds or the ones provided on the screen should be used in grades 7 and 8. For grade 6, they actually have an on-screen calculator for the second segment, but a handheld four-function calculator is allowable for students who have it included on their IEP or 504 document. This accommodation would only be allowable, though, for section 2 of the assessment, where the on-screen calculator is provided. If you need any further clarification regarding calculator use or anything like that, you can reach out to Katie Bars, our secondary math specialist, and she's happy to answer any extra questions you have about calculator use. With that, we're actually at our first question break. Do you need any clarification around the 4 types of tests, their windows of availability, or expiration timeframes, or calculator use? Just as a reminder, these slides are going to be shared with registered participants through Midas. So if there was information on the slide that you'd like to review again, you'll be able to do that at your leisure once the slides have been posted in Midas for you. Yeah, Jasmine, the summative test is the only required test. Alicia, students can bring their own, but it has to be one that is outlined as appropriate in the calculator manual. If you have questions, you can reach out to Katie with a specific calculator type and she can give you guidance. Ashley, you do not have to purchase licenses to use the benchmark tests, but the student does need to be enrolled in an LEA to have access to the benchmark tests. So we're going to go on to training tests. Erin, yes, that is correct. Benchmarks are not intended to be predictive, but interims are. So the importance of utilizing the training test is very simple. It is the best way to familiarize ourselves and our students with the functionality of the RISE system, okay? It also provides guidance for item types and administration procedures. It allows students to familiarize themselves with global tools in a really low stakes environment. Furthermore, another missed step a lot of time is giving training tests in all content areas. Oftentimes a teacher might think, well, I've given an ELA training test a couple of times and my students are used to it, so there's no need to do a science or a math one, which simply isn't the case. There are many components to the system which are content specific, like that calculator or lack thereof, as well as item types, which if a student isn't seeing them in a training environment, they might experience some difficulty when taking that benchmark or interim or summative assessment. There's far more truth to this little comic than I'd care to admit, and we hear about it so very often. But with more exposure to the system, we can alleviate this frustration that I know some of your teachers have felt. The training tests are provided on the RISE portal and do not require RISE login credentials. If you haven't taken a training test recently, I would encourage you to take some time and use the guest user access that's provided, especially with the addition of cluster items to our other content areas. This will give you a similar experience to what teachers and students experience, and it only takes about 10 to 15 minutes. Note, though, that if you're looking at them for the very first time with students, it may take a little bit longer as you all orient yourselves with where tools are, how they work, so on, things like that. Now, for my friends who plan to administer RISE tests remotely, it is still an expectation that you conduct a training test prior to an administration to ensure everything is working as expected. I know this may cause some grumblings because it's just one more thing that you have to do, but I promise you, if something isn't going to work right, or you're going to experience a network issue or notice that accommodations haven't been applied to a student account, you for sure want that to happen during a training test administration, not during your interim or your summative administrations. You may also notice there are 2 different ways to take a training test. The training tests these options, they're public. This training test guest login is very simple. For this option, you just select the training test option without a proctor and you sign in. This is great for teachers and staff to familiarize themselves with what the platform looks like and how it functions. It's also a great way to orient anyone who is expected to administer a RISE test. So this could include paras or teachers of non-core content areas. It can also be used as an informative tool for parents, as they may have questions about what their students are seeing and experiencing, and you can direct them here or even walk them through it. You can also administer a training test in a test session to mirror the RISE process. This way of administering a training test does require an SSID, a valid session ID, and the secure browser, though. These are far more useful when prepping for test administration because using RISE login credentials better mirrors the RISE summative process. And if you haven't been taking advantage of the interims or benchmarks previously, so you haven't been able to practice that login process, but unless you have taken advantage of that, okay? So if you choose to try this type of experience, be sure to select the test administration option in the preparing for testing section. Using this option also allows you to verify any accommodations which might be set for students needing those services. We'll go into more detail regarding accommodations later, but know that they need to be set for each student prior to the student signing into the secure browser for those accommodations to be available to them. This is also a good time to note that the visual appearance and login process has been updated just slightly. The session ID now appears on a second screen. The left side is what it will appear like for a proctored session, and the right side is what it will appear like for a guest session. After selecting the type of desired administration, you'll be able to select your grade level as well as the training test you wish to take. Note here that the training tests are banded, meaning the content is not single grade specific. It's important to help students and your teachers understand that content mastery is not the purpose of the training test. The purpose is to build familiarity with the system itself, its question item types, and the tools that are embedded. As I mentioned before, the training tests can be used to verify accommodations and ensure resources are applied and that they work correctly prior to taking other RISE assessments. So once accommodations or resources have been assigned and tied to individual student accounts, students should sign in with their username and SSID for practice and review any information when those settings appear. And even though content mastery is not a purpose of the training test, scoring assertions are provided to give feedback on the students' responses with scoring criteria. You will see these with our cluster items, specifically, especially on the science test, but you should be able to see those on the cluster items for other contents as they become available as well. The training
Elise,
test, yes.
sorry, I just want to speak for math. We do not have rubrics for math clusters on the training test.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
The training test also has Spanish adaptive functionality. Guidance for accessing training tests with Spanish enabled is outlined on this slide. Note that when students select Spanish from the language dropdown, the screen's contents will switch. But the student can actually toggle between Spanish and English within the training test using the button which becomes available to them. This is imperative for students to experience if you are considering the Spanish adaptive form of the summative assessment. We want students to be familiar with the system functionality long before their summative assessment experience. Many, many, many tests have been reset from the Spanish adaptive form to the English form and vice versa because students weren't familiar with how the Spanish adaptive form would appear and know that the language and I just need you to know that with the language services team, which must include parents and students, need to be consulted before this option is provided for a student. So when that team meets, I'd even encourage you to show this as a guest user login and add the Spanish adaptive functionality just to show all involved so they're aware. Okay, so the student can see what it will look like, so the parent can see what it will look like. More guidance and information is also in the TAM. Also know that this Spanish adaptive functionality is only currently available for training tests and summative tests. They are not currently available for benchmark modules or interims, and there is not a timeline for that either. It's important to note that the use of the Spanish adaptive functionality on a Windows device does require that the Spanish voice pack be installed on that device. You'll want to complete these steps to verify that that has been completed before a student uses it as well, if you are on a Windows device. The secure browser is required for administering all benchmark, interim, and summative tests, as well as the secure administration of the training test. So it needs to be installed on the devices prior to administration. Instructions for installation are in the technology resources link found under the resources section of the RISE portal. Make sure you refer to the supported browsers before updating any system as well on a device. If you have issues with the secure browser, you'll need to reach out to your technology specialist. There are also troubleshooting guides for various operating systems in the technology resources provided on the RISE portal. If you are the tech specialist, as there are a few of you who wear multiple hats for your LEA, this is where you can find some of that support. Okay. You can also reach out to the RISE help desk, and they are happy to help you at any time with any troubleshooting that might be happening with devices or the secure browser. So with that, do we have any questions surrounding training tests or the secure browser that have not been addressed yet? Can browsers be installed remotely? Jasmine, I am not sure about that. Do any of our Cambium people know, or is that a better question better asked to the help desk?
Um, Hi, Lisa, I can respond. This is Eric with Campion.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So it would be up to our help desk can certainly help with that. But we typically recommend that you have someone on site to install the secure browser. The instructions are available online on the portal, but and our help desk is more than happy to assist you. But it's much easier if you are in person to do it. But we don't prohibit remote installation if you have a way to do that. Yeah, so reading the chat here. So yeah, so if your IT team had a way to remotely install the secure browser, we'd be happy to work with you with our help desk to support that.
Perfect. Thank you. Just know also with that, Jasmine, I'll add, if you are going for an overnight installation push, the help desk is not available in the middle of the night. So if there was an issue, they would have to reach out for assistance when the help desk became available. I believe it's 7 a.m., but I actually have a slide that gives you a time. Okay. We're also now going to look at the resources and systems that are available to you through the portal. This is a high-level overview of what each of these sections provides. And you'll see there are 5 different tabs to choose from, along with an abbreviated version of what you'll find or be able to do in each of those sections. We're going to start today with resources. The resources tab houses the tech resources previously mentioned, as well as other helpful user guides like the TIDE user guide, the TAM, and the reporting user guide. To find these, you just select the user guide folder under Browse. There are lots of other available resources you can go through as well, but we're going to focus on the available user guides since those are really the bread and butter for test administration. The TIDE user guide is where you'll take care of all accounts, adding accommodations for students who require them, as well as monitoring test participation. It also outlines the appeals process for admin and LEA users. It should be noted here that TIDE received quite the update over the summer, and while its overall functionality and basic design haven't changed, its appearance is quite different. So if you haven't logged in yet, be prepared for that, and also know that when we get into the nitty-gritty of TIDE, the slides, the screenshots on them are going to look different than you've experienced in the past. The TAM has the step-by-step process outlined for how teachers administer tests and how students take tests. It also contains the scripting required for test administration. I would recommend all test administrators familiarize themselves with the test delivery and scripted sections prior to administration to alleviate confusion. Most of the questions I respond to from teachers regarding test administration could be easily answered just by building familiarity with the information that's provided in the TAM. The reporting guide includes all the information needed to access your reports once students have completed testing. This is available for all tests except training tests. We update these user guides at least yearly, but please know there are times we make adjustments mid-year if we realize that more clarity can be provided or if something needs to be updated. This is why it's important to subscribe to those portal updates and why I wouldn't recommend printing any of these documents in their entirety and assuming that it's a one and done situation. While we don't anticipate large changes happening after our initial yearly updates, these documents are more organic in nature and we want them to be as useful as possible. So when we can provide more detail or clarity, we don't want to wait until next year to do it. We just do it now and add it in there. So be aware of that. The second menu tab is the benchmark module previewing system, and it is available to all users except students who are registered in TIDE. And because of this, the information housed here is not considered public. The system allows users to securely preview benchmark modules to determine appropriate instructional use. It is not appropriate to use the benchmark module preview system to review the benchmark modules with students or to copy the items to be used in another format. Directions for how to review benchmark modules in the previewing system can be found in the TAM and in the RISE benchmark module preview system section of the TAM. Once you've logged in and selected the module you wish to preview, you'll be able to toggle between the questions and view any stimuli associated with the questions, like a reading passage. Again, not to be used for instructional or practice purposes with students or parents. This is only for teachers to determine which benchmark modules would best fit their classroom's instructional goals. So I'm going to walk you through this now. So once you've logged in, the benchmark module preview directory allows users to select their desired grade, and then users can scroll through the content and view the specific benchmark modules for that content area. I've selected grade 6 here. No, this is not a comprehensive list of what's available. I just included some screenshots to show there are many provided for ELA, math, and science. To see the entirety of what's provided, you would need to log in and select your desired grade level and then scroll through those. You can see that when I select a benchmark to preview, it appears just as the test does. The teacher can toggle between the questions at the top, view, and they can utilize all of the tools provided for that item. They can even have the item read aloud, and they can attempt to respond to the item. After all of the items are reviewed, the teacher will end on one of these two pages. The top one will show if the teacher responds to every item. The bottom one will show if the teacher just moved quickly through the items. Know that with this option, scores are not shown, so it's more of a preference of how teachers choose to review these modules on their own. Again, this previewing tool is not to be used with students and is only allowable for determining which benchmark modules align best to your instructional practices. If I were with you in person, I'd probably be saying something like, now, what's the purpose of the benchmark modeling preview tool? And have you respond vocally to check for understanding, just to ensure that you're aware this is not to be used with students. Okay, this is for teachers to better align their instructional goals with the benchmark modules, should they elect to use them. Now we're going to look at TIDE. TIDE stands for Test Information Distribution Engine. And this is where things are going to look very different than they have in the past. But again, know the functionality and organization of the information is still nearly identical. When you select the TIDE tile, you'll be prompted to log in with your RISE credentials. And once you've logged in, the TIDE homepage will appear. While it looks very different than it has in years past, it still reflects the stages of the testing process. Note that the blue after testing section is for LEA level users only. So if you don't have an LEA level account, you will only see the first orange and green sections. There's also a waffle menu on the left-hand side, which allows you to switch between applications. The Secure File Center is where you can access secure documents and student data files that you've previously exported, as well as download, archive, or delete any of those other previously exported files. Permissions for accessing data and viewing other information in TIDE is determined by your user role. There are 6 different user roles you can choose from in TIDE, and those 6 different roles have different permissions associated with them, which also changes the access of information the user might have available to them. This screenshot from the TIDE user guide gives you an idea of how those permissions break down. For example, a district LEA level user can perform tasks that are not available to a school level user. You can also see here that LEA and school administrators are granted more permissions than teachers or proctors. Permissions also are going to limit the scope of data access. So a district level user can work with data pertaining to their district, school, or any individual teacher assigned to their LEA, while a school level user is only going to be able to work with data pertaining to their assigned school or even just their assigned rosters if they are a teacher. So now we're going to look at each of these sections individually, and we're going to start with preparing for testing, which is the orange section. Here, you can view and edit user accounts as well as add new users. LEA users hold the responsibility for ensuring teachers and admin accounts are kept current. When you have teachers no longer associated with your LEA, those accounts need to be removed because oftentimes another LEA is trying to add them, and they can't if you haven't deleted them. This process needs to be done at least yearly, but if you have movement within the school year, it's best to address it right away. You may have already experienced the frustration of attempting to add a new user account for your school only to have the system give you this. At the beginning of each school year, again, you'll want to do a search for those user roles and update it. This is just an example with the teacher role. I would now need to click on that three-dot kebab menu for any teacher users who are no longer associated with my school or my LEA, and I can then delete that account or I can edit it. Okay, if the teacher's already in my district and has just switched schools within my LEA, I can just add another role at another school using the edit option and then remove the roles that are no longer valid. Something to point out here, there's no reason for a teacher to have both a teacher role and a proctor role because a teacher can do everything a proctor can do. This also goes with other roles. For example, a school administrator or a learning coach may also teach a class or two, and they don't need to have the school administrator role and teacher role. They can just have the school admin role because the hierarchy of permissions will allow them to do everything that they need. If the teacher is brand new to your organization and needs to be added, you will start with their work issued email account. And it's important to know here, this is the one field that if you make a mistake or if it ever needs to be updated, like with a name change, you will need to contact the RISE help desk. I can't do anything to edit this field, and neither can you once you've saved it. Okay, you'll then be required to fill in the user's first and last name. You can click the remote proctor box, you can enter their cactus, and then assign the role desired. I would note here with the cactus, if you have a teacher account that doesn't have a cactus number, their classes are not going to roster. So make sure before you call us in a panic, just double check that the cactus ID has been entered. And if it hasn't, just go ahead and enter it and save, and your classes will load in the next nightly upload. Okay. The only new user account that I need to create for you is if you are a new LEA assessment director. If you know you're leaving though and have a replacement prior to your finish date, you can actually add that person and give them even a little bit of a lesson on how to remove you when you're done with that. Again, LEA users hold the responsibility for ensuring teacher and admin accounts are kept current for the organizations that they oversee. So when you have users, whether they're teachers or administrators or proctors who are no longer associated with your LEA, those accounts do need to be removed. The student dropdown will allow you to access and edit student accounts, like adding accommodations, as well as uploading student settings. You can also create frequency distribution reports, which we'll go over a little bit later. But know that frequency distribution reports will allow you to filter by grade, and then things like scribe, color choice, assistive technology, things like that. So whenever you're accessing student information, the results can be exported to your secure file center, which we touched on earlier on the TIDE homepage. This allows for larger result tables and can export as an Excel file or a CSV file. We're going to take a slight detour over to rosters as it works with this students tab a bit. The rosters tab allows you to search pre-existing rosters. You can also create or edit or delete any user-defined rosters, and you can view system-defined rosters. Sometimes I'm asked why someone would want a user-defined roster, and this is a great option if a teacher who works with students receiving special education services, that teacher might want to create a roster with those students who may already be on a system-defined roster with another teacher. It can also be really helpful in a co-teaching situation as well. Remember that system-defined rosters cannot be edited and they are loaded through the UTrex sync. If you are experiencing roster issues, please reach out to our assessment data specialist over UTrex, Maureen Rushing. She's great at helping you track down students who aren't showing up, And it's usually because they have a fatal error or are new enough that the systems haven't synced yet. However, if that's not the case, she can submit a ticket to get things fixed for you. If you are interested in creating a user-defined roster, you'll want to add a roster and then search for the students that you want to have populate that roster. You'll then name the roster, select the teacher or other school personnel you'd like to have associated with it, and select the students you want to add. You do this by using the add or remove icons, okay? And then when you're finished, you just save and continue. You can also create user-defined rosters with a bulk upload. To do that, you'll need to fill out the template and upload it in Tide, and then just verify that the information is correct. Once it is, you can upload it and it will be there for you. Are there any questions regarding the RISE portal's user guides or rostering? I've actually included Maureen's contact information here on this slide as well, because as much as I try to help you, I cannot respond to many of your specific rostering questions. So if there's something specific, just take note of her email and send her one. Or if you drop it in the chat, she's also here as well and can come off mute and respond. Any questions for portal resources or rostering? Okay. If there is, drop it and we can always come back to it. With that, we're going to go back to that student drop down now, and we're going to look more closely at these last two components. Now, in an effort to not have to travel backward through slides, this is kind of your clarion call for how to set accommodations for students within the system. So if you're multitasking, this is like a stop, look, and listen moment, because I want you to be able to apply accommodations to student RISE accounts, okay? This is a demo student record, and it gives you an idea of what an individual student record might look like. The student information is used to search it. That's displayed at the top, while the student participation is displayed on the bottom. You can view individual settings by first clicking those little ellipses, the 3-dot kebab menu on the left, and then clicking the pencil assigned to test settings. Once you click that pencil icon for editing test settings, you'll be directed to the student test settings and tools screen. And while it isn't as small as in previous years, which we're super grateful for, there's a lot to take in this space. You'll note there are separate menu tabs at the top of the screen, including the student's test settings and tools. There's a student information tab, a participation tab, a roster tab, and a history tab. All of those can be used to view that individual information specific to that student. So to edit a student's settings to include any of these accommodations, you will use a series of drop-down menus and toggle switches that you see here on the screen, okay? You'll want to make changes to assistance tools or presentation modifications and any other accommodations that are outlined in a student's IEP or 504 document, okay? Accommodations are not uploaded through the Scram or Utrex, okay? They're taken care of manually through this section. This is also where you can set the Spanish adaptive feature for the summative assessments for math and science. If you have questions regarding a student's accommodations, please reach out to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist who oversees RISE. Her email information will actually appear on a slide soon if you don't already have it stored somewhere. To apply the Spanish adaptive feature, you are going to select Spanish under the math and or science test families and click save. We've developed recommendations for students who we feel would benefit most from the Spanish adaptive version of the summative assessment, and those recommendation guidelines are provided in the TAM. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to note that the decision ultimately needs to be determined by the LEA's language services team. This is with the student and parent also. Okay, it should never come as a surprise to a student that they're going to experience a test in English or Spanish. They should have been part of the conversation and decision making for determining that accommodation, and should have experienced it completely with a training test in the appropriate content areas prior to ever seeing it on a summative. This isn't going to show up in Tide, but I wanted to bring attention to what it looks like for students in the testing environment. So once that language setting is applied, the Change Language button will appear with all of the other global tools in the student's secure browser. Okay, this button doesn't appear for all students, only those students who've had the Spanish adaptive functionality applied to their test. And finally, also under the student menu is the frequency distribution report. Okay, this report is available at the LEA or school level. You'll notice the drop down allows for many options to be selected. This result can be displayed in tabular format, so like a grid or a graphical format or both. You can actually combine the two, and then you can export or print those if you choose to. If you have students who require the use of assistive technology or a scribe, you will need to make a request to USBE through Tide using the Forms menu. This will alert USBE and it will require approval. To do this on the Tide dashboard, an LEA or a school level user will click on Forms and then click Submit Forms. On the next page, you'll select the type of form you wish to submit. It's recommended, though, that if you have students who are using dictation or speech to text, that you fill out the scribe/speech to text request form, not the assistive technology form. For assistive technology requests, you need to complete the form detailing the demographic information of the school as well as the requirement of the accommodation. And all sections of this form have to be completed prior to submission. Once you've completed the form, you do have to agree that the accommodation is documented, used regularly and with fidelity in class instruction, and has been attempted in training tests to ensure it functions as expected for the student. If you agree, you click the I agree checkbox and submit. It's important to know that upon submission, a tracking identifier is going to be provided for you, and it is recommended that you save this little identifier just to easily track the status of your accommodation request. Also note here that once submitted, requests cannot be edited or changed. The request will then be reviewed by USBE staff, and upon approval, staff will then enable the requested accommodations in Tide. So again, if there's any questions regarding accommodations, you'll want to reach out to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist, and her contact information appears on this slide for your reference. Once you submit those requests, you can also review them. So on the Tide dashboard, you'll click on Forms, and in the Preparing for Testing grouping there, you can click View or Edit Forms. On the next page, the View or Edit search box is displayed. Fields denoted with that little asterisk are the ones that are required. Just select and input the relevant search information settings based on your previously submitted accommodation form and then click Search. From there, the status of the forms matching the selected search criteria are going to display for you on your screen. And this step is optional, but if you want to view further details about the request, just click on the pencil icon to the left of the applicable form. And again, if you have any questions regarding accommodations or how to submit forms, just reach out to Jessica and she can provide any assistance for you. If you need to enter a parental exclusion for a benchmark module, the process is different from how we would add those participation codes for interim and summative assessments. We'll actually review that process here soon, but for now, we're going to focus on a parental exclusion for a benchmark module, okay? You can do this manually or as a file upload. To do it manually, just fill in the appropriate search fields for the LEA or school, and then any student information you may have to help narrow down the search. And once you've got the information entered, select the search button centered at the bottom of the screen. And you'll see the student settings that you're familiar with. On this screen, you can verify participation codes, which have already been added to the student settings. Again, we're going to look how to do that soon. And now you can actually even view which benchmarks have a parental exclusion. This is a really big deal for Maureen and I, that you can see them in one place. To edit the benchmark module parental exclusion, you'll click on those little 3-dot kebab ellipses menu by the student. And beneath the header bar, you'll use the drop-down menus to select yes or no as needed for those. Remember, this process is specific to applying the parental exclusion for the benchmark modules, okay? To apply the 204 parental exclusion code for interim and summative assessments, it's different, and we're going to review that process next. The last drop-down is where you go to view and edit other participation codes. These participation codes are used by USBE for the summative tests, like the 204 parental exclusion. And it's where you can set those for both interim and summative assessments, among other things. So to add a participation code to a student, you'll search for the student using the filters, click search, and the search results table will show the students who match the search criteria you entered. The participation codes column lists any currently assigned participation codes. To edit those, you'll select the little dot, 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 ellipses, triple dot, again, sometimes called the kebab menu icon. And then for those students, you can then update the participation code as you choose. You'll then just use the drop-down menus available for each test the student is eligible for to update those as needed. Last year, we updated this list to better delineate if the student's receiving language accommodations or accommodations related to a special education or both. rather than the generic accommodation participation code. And this year, we've added a few more to help better categorize tests which are being invalidated. So there's a code when this invalidation fault lies with the student, and there's another separate code when the invalidation code lies with the proctor. Okay. As a rule of thumb, if the student doesn't appear on a roster, whether it be for a benchmark or an interim or a summative, check the parental exclusion status. Okay. Because if they have a parental exclusion marked, they're not going to roster. All right. Finally, we have the testing windows, and some of you may have already created your windows for benchmark and interims, which is great. If you haven't, I would strongly recommend doing so. This is one of those things which even still causes issues because teachers are able to administer any test at nearly any time if you don't have them set. Also note, you'll be able to set your summative window when the mid-year summative window opens on November 4th. Okay, you'll want to do that just to ensure that summative tests aren't given in error by mistake. To do that, you'll first enter the required information at the top of the panel and then select the tests from the list to add to the test window. Click Save. That will create your test window. It's very simple. Okay. If you don't want to create your testing windows manually, you can also use the file upload process. Guidance for how to do that is included in the best practices for using test windows document, and the template required is linked below it. Del Rey, if you don't have adding testing window, shoot me an email so we can just double check your permissions. It's important to set your test windows again so that tests, especially our summative tests, aren't taken by mistake. Okay, by setting the windows, when a teacher goes to administer a test, only the ones you've chosen to make available during that time are going to appear as options. When all is said and done, you should have created 3 separate testing windows, one for each of the types, like a benchmark window, an interim window, and a summative window. Do we have any questions regarding participation codes, testing windows, or accommodations? I included Jessica's email here as well. And I will echo Eric's sentiment in the chat. Yes, if you have a student who is expecting to see a Spanish adaptive test, please make sure the language has already been set in tide prior to them starting, because it's a lot harder to work out afterward. Does a whole LEA or school have to complete benchmarks, interims, or can they just have SPED department use them? So Ashley, when it comes to benchmarks and interims, both of those are local decisions. There is no state guidance for you. You get to determine who uses them, when they use them, why they use them, how they use them. Mark, what do you mean by the list of tests? There's 4 types. Okay, so we've got the training test, which is the practice area, right? Interim is a test that is available for all of the content. Not all of, that's a lie. Hold on. Interim is available for math and ELA. ELA, though, is delayed until November. Students can take it in the fall and then again in the winter. So that one can be administered twice if you choose to. Benchmark modules are small snippets that are fixed form, meaning the students are going to answer all of the same questions. They're much smaller and they are very standards driven, very standard specific, where the interim is adaptive and covers about 50% of the summative blueprint, which is why interims can be predictive of the summative assessment, where benchmarks are standard specific. Does that help? Perfect. Yeah, and our summative test is the one that's just given in the spring at the end. Any other questions for accommodations, participation codes, or windows? And thanks to our content friends who are answering questions feverishly in the chat as well. It's super helpful. I appreciate your efforts. Okay, with that, we will, mid-year summative isn't required. So Jasmine, it is required if the course ends mid-year. So this tends to happen more regularly with accelerated math students. I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen in science and language arts because sometimes it does, but it's far more prevalent in math. For example, um, students might be enrolled in Math 7 for the first semester and Math 8 for the second semester so that they are ready and prepared for secondary math the following year as an actual eighth grade student and not a ninth grade student. And so, in that respect, the mid year summative is required if the course is ending and they're not taking a spring summative. And I say that because if the course finished in the middle of the year, Math 7, and then they finished Math 8 in June when the year ended, they would only be required to take the Math 8 summative. They wouldn't have to take the Math 7 one because only one of those tests is going to count per accountability. So we're going to take the test that has the more accelerated coursework or more advanced coursework. Um, but if the course doesn't end, for example, if it was maybe a trimester, so maybe they did Math 7 first trimester and second trimester, and then they were doing Math 8 third trimester, and then the following first trimester, they would for sure have to take the mid-year summative because they weren't finishing the coursework by the end of the school year. I'm really sorry if that wasn't clear, but I hope that it was. If you need more clarification, shoot me an email and I can try to provide it with a little more detail. Okay. So back to our resources and system tiles on the portal, the test administration tab is for anyone administering a test. Okay, this is where they're going to go to prepare and manage their live testing sessions. So before you conduct any testing, I'd recommend going through this little checklist to ensure all of your bases are covered. If you have questions regarding the standard test administration and testing ethics policy training, please contact Scott Ross-Kelly, our test administration and data coordinator. I also recommend that you review the TAM and make sure you have your scripting ready to read. You'll want to ensure that the devices students will use are going to be able to support RISE testing or in working order. This includes keyboards, computer mice, headphones. Make sure students who are required to have accommodations have that appropriate setting applied. Take into account the classroom or location environment. You'll want to eliminate distracting noises. Don't play music during standardized assessments. You'll also want to cover or remove materials that may provide hints or answers to students. When I was in the classroom, I just tacked up king-size bed sheets that I acquired from DI. It made it really quick and easy. You'll need to notify students of your electronic device policy prior to administration. Remember that no other devices are allowed during testing. So this would include, but are not limited to, like cell phones, smartphones, meta glasses, smartwatches, any internet capable device, unless it's required for monitoring like glucose levels on an IEP. But even that guidance Jessica can provide for you. Okay. If you have elected to use testing tickets, there are a few places you can access them, but I think that the print test tickets option here in that little green section is the easiest place. After selecting the print test tickets dropdown, you'll select the print from roster list where you'll be prompted to use the dropdown menus for roster type and teacher name to create the list. From there, you select the section you wish to print test tickets for, and the printer icon is going to then become available for you to print those from your device. We will look at the monitoring test progress section, but not the appeals or after testing menu. They become more important when we get to summative testing, so we'll look more closely at these menu options and what they entail during a training held in the winter as we prep for summative test administration. So there is a plan and manage testing report under monitoring test progress that details all of the students' test opportunities and the status of those test opportunities. The plan and manage testing page has basic search and advanced search options. This slide shows the advanced search and its available search criteria. The basic search is designed for quick access and offers a pared down selection of options. But after you fill out the search criteria, select generate report, and the participation results are going to appear. For example, a teacher might choose to track which of their students have submitted writing benchmark modules. And this is how they could do that if it was desired. Okay. A grid will appear containing the student participation results. Not all columns in the grid are selected by default. So to add or remove information, you're going to use the filter button at the top right of the table. Note that the test administrator name displayed on the plan and manage testing report doesn't imply the name of the teacher. The test administrator is the person who conducts the test. And so this can be the same as the teacher, or it could be a different person. Because the report lists the testing opportunities, a student can also appear more than once on the report. And you can export or search results in either Microsoft Excel or CSV format, as well as other tied search results. Now we're going to move into the actual test administration. So these are the same 6 steps for any RISE test or benchmark module. 2 proctors are best for test security. While they don't need to be certified teachers, they do need to have gone through the appropriate testing ethics training. One can be a roaming proctor, but if this is the case, you should have a protocol in place for if the proctor in the room needs assistance. There was an issue actually just last year where a student was reported for an academic integrity issue, but because the teacher couldn't leave the room and there wasn't a communication plan in place, the issue wasn't reported until the following day. So as you can imagine, this actually made it more difficult to address and even allowed the issue to continue to go on longer than it should have. So just be aware, we expect you to have some form of communication plan in place if you are using the roaming proctor as a second proctor. The first step in administering any test is just to create the session. So this actually needs to be done less than 20 minutes before starting the test in order to prevent the system from timing out. The test selection window color codes the available tests and organizes them into categories. You can click the plus sign button next to a category to view the tests in that category, and then just click the test to administer. Or you can click the checkbox for a category to include all tests. Students will only have access to the tests that you include in the session and the ones that they are eligible to take. You will also need to select a reason from the drop-down menu and then click the Start Session button. On the same screen from the previous slide, if a summative test is selected, a pop-up box is going to appear. A couple of years ago, in our continued effort to prevent the misadministration of summative assessments, this important box appears. It says, you are about to select a summative test. Students only have one opportunity to take this test. Click OK to continue. If you really want to administer this, please type summative. The test administrator then has to physically type summative to move on. Okay. Or if they've made a mistake, they hopefully can realize that early and just click the X in the corner and move past it. Okay. Believe it or not, though, this has not eliminated the misadministration of summative tests. So you also need to set your testing windows so that anyone proctoring also really needs to remove their autopilot setting from the brain and engage fully in the process, okay? We always want our students to read for understanding, and we need to model that as adults. So if we expect our students to read steps carefully, we need to practice this as well and recognize that there are consequences which will affect our students when we don't, okay? So again, this has been super helpful. We love that CAI has been able to implement this for us, but it didn't alleviate the issue entirely. Okay. I love the blaring alarm idea, Eric. I think it's great. A siren, flashing red lights. Once you click start the session, the system will generate the session ID. The ID appears at the top of the screen along with the stop button. The first portion of the session ID will be train for training tests or live for other tests. And this session ID needs to be provided to students in order for them to log in. Generally, people write it on the board for easy reference and then just erase it at the end of the class period or test session. You may also want to note the session ID just for your own records, just in case you accidentally close your browser. As students start signing in, though, the approvals button will appear next to the ID. And once you approve students for testing, the test session table will appear in the center of your screen displaying the student's testing progress. And we're going to discuss more about this later in the slides. In a live testing session, the approval tab will also blink red when a new student is waiting, okay? Now we're going to look at the TDS banner in its entirety. So in the banner at the top of the window, you will see a set of buttons and your username. The student lookup tab is to search for student login information and verify their login credentials. You can click approve requests to view a list of students who may have to use the print on request option that you need to approve. You can click print session if you want to print a screenshot of this screen. The help guide link is in the upper right. It allows you to access information about the test administration interface. You can also click the log out button under your account to exit, but I wouldn't recommend clicking that unless you're already done with the session. So that student lookup tab I just showed you on the last slide is helpful if a student is having trouble logging in because you can verify the student's login credentials. You can use either the quick search or advanced search option to view the information entered from the student in Tide. When using either of these search options, if there are matches, the information will appear in the bottom of the window. If there is no match, you'll actually see an error message. If you see the student you're looking for, you can click the I icon button next to the student's name. The screen will then display the student's information, but note the information displayed may vary slightly from what is shown here. Once you start the test session and students have logged in, you must approve their test settings before they can access their tests. To approve students for testing, you just click the approvals button next to the session ID, and you'll want to review the list of students displayed just to make sure that all students chose the correct content area and test to ensure that they are all those settings are all correct. This is done again with the little eyeball button in the See Details column. We'll talk more about this in a bit too. If no changes are needed, you can just select Approve All Students to admit all students to the session. But if a student selected an incorrect test, you can deny that student entry to the test session by clicking the X button in the Action column. Even though you can approve all students at the same time, students need to be denied entry individually. You deny students entry if the session is maybe the student wasn't supposed to enter that session, or maybe the student's demographic information is incorrect, or they were issued the incorrect testing ticket. Maybe the student has required accommodations that aren't showing up. All of those would be reasons to deny a student entry to a session. Okay, just know that if you deny students entry, it's not going to prevent other students who have been approved from beginning their tests. They can still continue to move forward. Once students log in and are approved for testing, the test administrator is going to monitor their status from the tables on the screen. The progress column displays the student's progress through the items in the test. The test settings column is going to display either standard or custom. Custom is when a student's test settings are different from the default standard setting for that test, okay? And if you want to verify those customized settings, that's where you can click on that eyeball again. The action column allows you to pause a student's test. If the system ever detects that a student may have technical issues or requires assistance, a test with potential issues table is going to appear above the test without issues table. A more info icon will also appear in the test status column, and hovering over this icon will display more information about the issue. So if students request a printout, a printer icon is actually going to appear in that actions column too. But the print on request feature is only available for students who require it per their IEP or 504 plan. So before approving the student's print request, ensure that it's going to be sent to a printer that's monitored by staff who've been trained in test security, because all printed test items or stimuli, the reading passages, all of those things must also be securely destroyed and stored immediately following a testing session. Okay. The approved requests button allows you to view a full list of any print requests that you're approving during the current session. If you wish to print this for your own records, you can. You just click print at the top. If you wish to print a snapshot of the screen in its current view, you can click the print session button. This is actually really useful for tracking which students did not complete their tests at the end of a session and might need to be rescheduled for another session. Just know it might be necessary to set the page layout to landscape or adjust the margins in the print preview screen of your device in order for the list to fit appropriately on the page. And then remember that any printouts containing personally identifiable student information need to be securely stored and should be destroyed after use. You have two options within the test administration interface to pause or stop testing once it's begun. You can pause an individual student's test, or you can also stop an entire session. So to pause an individual student test, you just click the pause button in the actions column on the table for that student. And when prompted, click OK to confirm that you really want to pause the test. For example, this option would be appropriate if a student becomes ill and couldn't pause the test on their own prior to leaving. Like they just up and ran for the bathroom. Okay, this is a great time to use that pause feature. In the event of an emergency, though, that would require all students to stop testing, for example, like a fire drill or another quick evacuation, you can quickly and efficiently pause all students' tests just by stopping the session. Okay, just know that if you stop the session, all of those in progress tests are going to be paused. If a session stops, it is not going to be resumed with the same session ID. You can, however, create a new test session and give the new session ID to the students so that they can resume testing after you return to the testing environment. In the event you need to stop the entire test session again for all students, just click the stop button. A pop-up message is actually going to appear and then prompt to just click OK. If you do forget to log out before leaving the testing area, though, the session is going to close automatically after 20 minutes of your inactivity on both the proctor and student computers. So you would then need to create a new testing session and provide the new session ID to students in order to resume testing. If something of this nature occurs and students have fallen subject to that pause rule and are unable to review their test items as they thought they'd be able to, you can actually file a test repeal request for a grace period extension, but this does need to be done immediately after the issue has been experienced. So students who have submitted their tests cannot have them reopened with a grace period extension. It's only if it was paused and then they couldn't go back. Okay. Upon completion of a session, you can click the logout button in the upper right corner of the page. It is preferable for you to log out only after stopping your active session, just because, again, logging out is going to create an issue where all in-progress tests are going to be automatically paused. This table presents some of the common issues that you or your students may encounter during a test session. I'm not going to go through them with you, but you can review the slide later. If you need more detailed information, though, on additional technology tips, you can actually refer to the test administration manual and the technical specifications manual for online testing for some further guidance and troubleshooting notes. So now we're going to look at the secure browser student interface. This also appears slightly different than it has from years past. You'll notice the first name and SSID are both required for sign-in. Students must use the secure browser to log in, again, to the student interface. And the secure browser is designed to ensure test security by prohibiting students from accessing any other programs or websites during testing from the device that they're using. New for this year, the session ID appears on a separate page. So once students enter their session ID, they should click the Join Session button. After logging in, students need to complete a few more steps before they begin testing. Students are going to be asked to view and verify their personal information. If their information is correct, they should click yes to proceed. If the information is incorrect, they really do need to click no and return to the login page. You're going to maybe then even want to contact your school or district test coordinator to have the student's information updated in Tide before they attempt to log in again, or even just ensure the student's been entering the correct login credentials or was given the correct testing ticket. Okay, this is really important to pay attention to because some students have the same first and last names. The grade and the SSID do need to match. So if a student mentions that something looks a little bit odd, take that as an important note. Don't just tell them it's okay to move forward. On the Your Test screen, the students will then see the list of assigned tests for their session. This screenshot, though, just know is for a training test, so know it's going to look slightly different for a benchmark, an interim, and a summative. Okay. After the teachers approved students for a test session, students will see a screen titled Choose Settings. This screen displays the name of the test and any selected accessibility resources. If the information is correct, the student can click Select. If the information is incorrect, again, they're going to want to go back and wait to be advised by their teacher. If those accommodations weren't set, this is where you definitely want to stop, have that entered correctly before the student proceeds forward. Teachers are also going to read the required scripting located in the TAM to guide students through the login and confirmation process. Know that much of the scripting is embedded. This happened a couple of years ago, so students do need to have headphones. Okay, every single student needs to have headphones because they are going to be actively listening during this process. After verifying their test, students will proceed through the functionality checks to make sure their test device is working. And then next, students are going to review any information about the tools and navigation features that they're going to have available to them during testing in the instructions and help screen. When students begin test now, they are going to be presented with the first item on the test. If a student is having difficulty logging in, an error message and code will display on the login screen. Similar to the previous errors chart, I'm not going to go through them individually, but I would encourage you to do so with your teachers and other test administrators, as they're the ones who are going to be seeing these. Since they're the ones in the trenches, they're the ones who are going to need these troubleshooting tools in their pockets for reference. Before moving on to the global tools embedded within the system, are there any questions regarding how to start a session, get students logged into the system, things like that? I've noticed the chat's been pretty active, but I also think that most of the items have been responded to. If you feel like your question was neglected, though, feel free to drop it again. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so we'll go ahead and move on to our global tools. So the global tools, and there are also other features that are available for all students to use during testing. And these tools and features are going to be discussed in detail on the following slides, but the red boxes shown here give you an idea as to where they're all located, so you can kind of navigate appropriately. The notepad allows students to make notes about an item. It is item specific, so students can only access their notepad for a question when they're on that question's test page. Notepad items will continue to be saved though when students move on to the next segment or if tests are paused. So test items with entries on the notepad will display with a small little notepad badge next to the item number if a student wants to go back and review what they had put on a notepad for an item. The notes tool, however, is not item specific. These notes are available throughout the entire test, and anything students type into the notes section is saved and continues to be accessible for later segments in a segmented test. Okay. The notes will also be retained if the student logs out of a test and resumes it later. It's also important to note here, though, the notes typed on the notepad from the previous slide and the notes tool from this slide are stored upon submission. Okay. They are saved. This can result in an alert paper situation. If any of the language used in the notes or the notepad is considered alarming in nature, okay, when this occurs, Emily Ing, our support specialist, will notify you, and there's a process that you will need to complete with Scott Ross Kelly, our test administration and data coordinator, to ensure that any concerns have been addressed as we take the entries that students put into these very seriously. Students can also use the highlighter tool to mark text that they want to remember in reading passages or math stimuli, and in any text-based answer option, okay? If a student pauses the test, it's also kind of cool to note that highlighting made before pausing is also retained. The strike-through tool can be used to help students cross out answers they choose to ignore on a particular question. Students do need to select a response though. So if you just select 3 items with a strike through, it's still not going to allow them to move forward because they still need to mark an answer. Also know, applying the strike through tool doesn't prevent the student from selecting that answer. It's just a visual marker for the student to have it like kind of grayed out or strike through. Another element of the online test that helps students succeed is the mark for review feature. As they proceed through a test, students are going to be required to answer each question on the screen before they can go on. So if they're unsure of an answer, they need to mark what they think is the best answer, but then they can mark this for review before completing the test segment and come back to it after. At any time during a test segment, students can navigate back to those marked items within the segment and review and change their answers as desired. This can either be done by clicking the back button in the navigation toolbar until they reach the desired item, or by using the items drop-down menu located in the upper left corner of the page, and they can select that specific item. Note that once a student has completed a test segment in a test that prohibits navigation to a previous segment though, or if they're paused for more than 20 minutes, returning to items marked for review are no longer allowed. Okay. Just also know though, the 20-minute pause rule here does not apply to performance tasks or even like the writing test. Okay. During testing, students can use the zoom feature to increase the size of text and graphics by using the zoom in button. Okay. The text can also then just be returned to a smaller size using the zoom out button. An English glossary feature is available for students to use for ELA grades 3 through 5 on reading passages and items during testing. The student can access the glossary by clicking any of the pre-selected terms which are indicated on the screen by a gray dotted outline. When the student hovers their mouse over that term, it's going to highlight in blue. And if the student then clicks that highlighted term, a pop-up box is going to appear with a definition of the term. You just click the X in the upper right corner to close that. The masking tool allows students to cover up any distracting area of the test page. To use this tool, students click the masking button and then click and drag their mouse to select a rectangular area on their screen. And then to deactivate, the student can either click the masking button again, and then the masking area remains on the screen, even if after the masking mode is deactivated. To remove that though, they click the X in the upper right corner of the masked area. The Select Previous Versions tool allows students to view and restore responses that are previously entered and saved for a text response item, like the writing test. Please note that the Select Previous Version tool cannot restore responses, though, that were entered prior to pausing. If your school plans to test over multiple days for interim or summative sessions, you may wish to have students pause their tests at a certain point so that they can resume testing at another time. For example, if you're testing for 45 minutes, they will then want to pause their test at the end of that 45-minute session. You may also allow a pause if students are taking a break from testing or need to leave the room for any reason. Whether they've been instructed to do so or not, though, students can pause their test at any time just by clicking the pause button in the upper left corner of their screen. The pause tool is definitely more heavily utilized during interim and summative tests since benchmark modules are designed again to be administered in that one class period or one sitting. Some rules apply though when a student pauses their test. So depending on the type of test and how long that pause lasts, for all tests that have been paused for less than 20 minutes, students can return from a break in testing and they can revisit any of the items in the current segment, change their answers if desired. This is the situation if a student just steps out of the testing environment for a few minutes, like a restroom break, or they were called to the office for a few minutes to pick something up and come back. Okay. Students taking all tests except writing who have paused their tests for longer than 20 minutes are only able to return to the most recently visited page that contains unanswered test items in the current test segment. Okay, they may change any answers presently on their page, but they can't access anything previous. If all items on the most recently visited page were answered prior to pausing, the student will actually resume the test on the next page of unanswered items. Okay, this happens sometimes during the science test because there are those cluster questions and a student answers all of them and they think they're on item number 4. And then when they log in the next day, it starts them on number 5 and they think that they've missed something. It's only going to skip them forward if they responded to all of the items. Okay. As an additional security measure, after 20 minutes of test inactivity, students are going to be logged out and their tests are going to be paused automatically. So students will receive a warning message prior to being logged out, and they need to click OK at the pop-up message within the communicated time of that time frame to avoid an automatic logout or pausing of the test. So if a student's test is paused due to inactivity, the same rules are going to actually apply as when they intentionally pause the test. The student can log in again, though, to the test and resume from that point if it was ever interrupted, just subject to that pause rule. Okay. The math grade 6 interim and summative tests are presented in segments, meaning there's 2 parts, and this is the only test that does this. When students reach the end of a test segment, they will receive a warning message asking them to confirm that they want to move on to the next segment. The warning also advises that they cannot return to change their answers in the current segment once they've moved on. So teachers should ensure that students understand the outcome of ending that segment and encouraging students to check their answers before moving on. Okay. The test administrator will then also need to approve the student before they can enter the second segment, as it is going to be the segment that includes that calculator global tool we talked about earlier. When students answer the final question on the test, the End Test button will appear in the upper left section of the screen. And the End Test button actually doesn't become visible until the student has selected at least one response to every single question of the test. If students click the Next button at this point, they will see a pop-up message advising them to click the End Test button when they have completed reviewing their answers. They may also click the Back button to go back and revisit previous items, subject to the pause rule if it's been applied during the test. For the writing tests, teachers need to be sure that students have completed the entire task before submitting their test. If students are taking a break during the writing test, they should pause their test rather than end their test. The End Test button will appear on the screen as soon as students have begun to answer their prompt, okay? But they don't want to click that until they're ready to submit for scoring, all right? It wouldn't be bad to share this slide with your students so that even they are fully aware of what's going to occur when they hit End Test in any scenario. When students are ready to end their test, they click the End Test button and a pop-up message appears to allow them to select yes if they're ready to finish and no if they are not. This is also a great time to have some set procedures in place, like having students notify the teacher before submission. The TAM has specific directions for ending tests, and there are scripts for that as well for the end of a session. If you have a click happy kiddo who submits a writing test though before they're finished, just know it can be reopened through a testable if it's been submitted inadvertently. Okay, guidance is provided in the user guide, but know that that has to be caught right away for a writing test. But we do not reopen summative math, ELA, science, but we do understand that that writing one sometimes is tricky. Any questions now for global tools that are provided for students or the student experience? As a teaser, we're moving on to reporting. Okay, if we have no questions for that student experience, we will move on. So for reporting, this is where you are going to access any of your RISE score reports, whether it be benchmarks or interims or summatives. When you log into the reporting system, the first thing you see is the dashboard, where you can view overall assessment results for all of the assessments listed by assessment. And teachers can also view a list of their students. The dashboard generator allows the user to determine which types of tests they would like to start with, as well as being able to default those selections for subsequent logins. This screen will also allow quick searching for specific SSIDs, as well as changing various settings in the features and tools menu, like changing reporting time period to look at historical RAISE data, downloading student results, as well as other functionality. So once you have selected the test group's relevant settings, click the green Go to Dashboard button at the bottom to proceed. The selections chosen can be changed at any time by using the dashboard generator link on the top left of the screen. So this screen also shows the filters panel to the left of the tables. It's expanded to show the options available to the user. So if you're not initially seeing expected information, check your filters, because oftentimes it's because these are set to view a specific data set, which could actually be excluding what you are looking for. To view school level data results as an LEA user, you'll select the desired test from the list and then select the school you wish to view. You can use the arrows across the top to sort students by student count or completion rate, as well as their scale score. If you're wanting to search for previous year's RISE data, you'll need to change the reporting time period to the desired school year and then determine which students you want to view, because you can view your current students or your previous students. Okay, you can view your current students' past performance. To do that, you just keep the date set to today, or you can view the performance of your former students by setting the date to a day when those students were associated with you and had started testing. The Performance by Roster tab displays assessment results for each class. So users can sort roster level data by performance using those arrows. The first few rows also show aggregate performance data for your LEA, the school, and its total students. And filtering can be applied for the type of test, the reason, the school standards. It just depends on the screen that is selected. So on this screen, it is possible to view and expand various tabs of classroom level data, such as viewing the top 5 best or worst items for a given benchmark, or by viewing the total items available in the benchmark. After expanding an applicable tab for benchmarks and interims, you just click on the blue links at the top of each of the columns to view additional data, including viewing the answers and rubrics utilized for scoring the questions. Note that this functionality is not available for summative assessments, and also only available for benchmarks with more than 10 items. Okay. This method will allow for sharing and viewing of rubrics and answers without revealing individual student scores. You can also view your student performance in each area of the benchmark module or interim assessment by clicking the reporting category section bars to expand them. You can see individual items and student responses by clicking on them individually. Scores are shown as raw scores, okay? A raw score is a summary of how many points the student received based on how many questions they answered correctly. For benchmark modules with more than 10 items, as well as interim assessments, the 5 items where students performed best and the 5 items where students performed worst will show. So benchmark modules with fewer than 10 items do not have this functionality, okay? There aren't many of these anymore since the benchmark modules have become more targeted, but it's an absolutely awesome feature for the few that are still lingering in there. Users can select the individual item by clicking the blue item number, and then the teacher can review the item with the student in a formative manner. Again, this functionality is not available for summative assessments, but it is available for the interim assessments and the benchmark modules with less than 10 items. When an item number is selected, it will open on the screen where I've labeled it to do so under the number 1 without any student information or other PII. And the user can toggle between the most missed items using the arrows at the top, as well as the item and score tab. And the rubric and the resources tab is also available. On this tab, you can see the content alignment as well as the correct answer. Again, this is intended functionality to be used formatively, meaning after students have completed it, so teachers can help students meet those instructional goals they may have set for themselves. You can also use the breakdown feature to compare performance between various demographic subgroups. You can download student results in either a PDF, a zip, or a CSV format. You can even print those reports if you choose to do that. When it comes to scoring, benchmark module reporting no longer provides performance levels. It's only going to provide a raw score for you, okay? And it's also going to provide, though, a summary of how many points the student received based on how many questions they answered correctly. New last year is the item analysis report. It is available for every benchmark that reports item data. So highlights of the item analysis report include item reporting categories and standard alignment, item types, for example, like multiple choice, the percentage of the group of students who earn full, partial, and no credit on each item. If an item does not allow partial credit, the NA is going to display instead of a percentage. So to access the report, you'll navigate to your LEA school or your roster, okay, on the performance on test report. In the features and tools menu, select build item analysis report, and the item analysis window will appear, and it's going to open to the summary tab. Okay, that's the one you're viewing here. From the summary tab, to expand a table row and display more detailed data, you can click to the right and it's going to expand all those arrows. For multiple choice items, the detailed data, including the distribution of students who selected each of the options with the correct answer flagged with a check mark. Okay. For items that are not multiple choice or are multi-part, the detailed data included it is included in the distribution of the points earned. You can also export the summary tab to a CSV file using the export button at the top right. You'll want to either select basic summary to include only the default table rows, or you can select detailed summary to include all of the details in the expandable rows. You can also navigate to the single item view tab, either by clicking it or by clicking the number to the left of the listed item. This tab displays detailed data on an item specific, and below that, the item itself. So that includes the rubric and resources tab. You can navigate between items using the item number buttons on the left and the right. Interim and summative assessments cover multiple reporting categories as a result. And because of this, the following is shown in the reporting system for interim and summative assessments. So scores are going to be shown as scale scores. And a scale score makes it possible to compare one student's score to another student's score, even when they didn't respond to the same questions. Performance distribution is given using proficiency levels, and proficiency levels describe how your student applied the content-specific knowledge and the skills that are outlined in the core, and how they demonstrate that on like a 1 to 4 style scale, with below proficient, approaching proficient, proficient, and highly proficient. And finally, longitudinal reports are available to show growth over time. And this is available anytime you see that little climbing arrow icon. Longitudinal reports are available at all levels, district, school, class, and student, for interim and summative assessments. The longitudinal reports, though, are not available for benchmark modules. Are there any questions regarding reporting? Because at this point, we're going to be moving into remote proctoring information. So if your LEA doesn't have students receiving their instruction all online, you are free to drop off. You're also more than welcome to listen in as other questions may arise as we continue. But this remote portion takes about 20-ish minutes to get through. So I don't want you to sit through it if you have other things that are pressing for you to do. Unless this brings happiness and joy to your life, then by all means, hang out with us. But if you have questions before you drop off, go ahead and drop them in the chat. And if there are no questions, I will go ahead and continue with remote proctoring. So administering assessments to remote students requires additional considerations above what we would encounter in the classroom setting. This functionality is only available for students who receive all of their instruction in a remote setting. Because of the nature of remote testing, completing a training test remotely with the teacher as the proctor is also required prior to the administration of an assessment. Any scripting provided in the TAM is also still required. We have a set expectation for no more than 10 students in a remote session, and those 10 or fewer students must be proctored by 2 in-person proctors using a shared device. Okay. While completing a test, remote students will be able to communicate with proctors directly by clicking on the icon at the bottom of their screen. We'll review that in a bit if you're unfamiliar. Students also will not be able to see or communicate with other students during the administration of the remote test. And because of this, it is also imperative to have a second secure way of communicating with students, like your LMS, to communicate the testing session IDs prior to the test session itself. The remote administration method for RISE testing allows teachers and students to communicate both through text and video chat within the test delivery system, and additionally allows capability for teachers to monitor students directly. Students will connect with remote test session using the secure browser. And while teachers and students don't need to buy or install any additional software to enable the remote administration feature, they do need to have a device with a working camera and microphone and ensure that the secure browser has been installed on the student devices and that the student has been marked remote. And I'll show you how to do that. Teachers will sign into the RISE test administration site, though, just if they were testing in person. Clarify what you mean by in-person proctors, meaning those two proctors need to be sitting in the very same room using a device together. They cannot be in separate locations. For students needing to take a remote summative assessment, there is an online student field at the bottom of the student information section of TIDE. All users are going to be able to see this field, and users with a school administrator role or above, like an LEA user, can edit that. A teacher is not going to be able to edit that field. So this needs to be set per student as appropriate to the USBE remote testing policies. If set to yes, the student is going to receive the remote testing tools. If it is unset or set to no, the student will receive the standard in-person test. This action, again, needs to be taken for any test administered remotely, even a benchmark test. Okay, benchmarks, interims, and summatives can all be administered remotely. So if a student's going to take it, they need to be marked as an online student within the system. This is your remote proctoring checklist, which is provided in the RISE TAM and needs to be completed prior to any remote proctoring to ensure both teacher and student devices are working as expected. These charts describe the hardware and software requirements for the teacher's machine. The technology requirements to administer a RISE test remotely are similar to those used for assessments completed in the classroom, except again that both teacher and student need to have a webcam, a microphone, and functioning speakers or a headset. Before testing, you'll need to ensure that all of that meet the minimum requirements necessary for the remote testing experience. There are two ways to proctor remotely, and we encourage you to use the schedule a remote session option rather than the start a remote session right away one. Okay, scheduling is recommended for remote testing so that you can communicate that session ID with your students beforehand. Teachers are going to be prompted to set a start and end date for when the test is going to be available by selecting their test and session type. And after you've put in that date range, you'll need to select the test subject and grade, the session name and the type, and then click save. The session information pop-up window is then going to appear, and this pop-up window provides the session ID teachers need to share with students so that students can join the session when it starts. This information should not be shared over unsecured communication methods like a personal email or text message. Instead, teachers should communicate this information to students using a secure method, such as a classroom management system that teachers and students are already using for instructional purposes. They can also use an encrypted email. That's absolutely appropriate, as long as students are familiar with how to access encrypted information. This is one of the reasons you'll want to conduct a training test using this remote format prior to your summative administration, because you'll want your teachers and your students to be as familiar with the communication process as possible. If a teacher needs to, they can modify sessions, though, that were scheduled in advance and haven't started yet. For example, a teacher may want to modify a session after it was created just by changing its start date or its end date. To do this, they just need to access the RISE Test Administration site, and then the options for editing or deleting the sessions are available to them. After starting the remote test session, a window will appear to allow access to your device's webcam and microphone. So for remote sessions, a pop-up window is going to appear in your web browser, requesting access to your microphone and your camera as the teacher. You need to select allow, because if you don't, students taking the test are going to be unable to see you or hear you during any video conferences that you try to have. That means that this access is necessary in order for your remote students to see and hear you during that session. So you need to select the I agree and allow options to proceed. After selecting allow, the broadcast window will remain on the screen, and you have the ability to toggle your device's webcam and microphone on and off just using the toggles at the top of the window seen on the screenshot. The administration dashboard will look very familiar if you've ever administered a RISE test before. The session ID appears along with the option to add tests and approvals tab, the stop session button, with the addition of the option to broadcast a message to all students in the session, and the refresh page option. You can bring up the broadcast window at any time by selecting the broadcast message button on the teacher interface. This training will cover more about the broadcast window and its uses in some of the slides coming up. But for students signing in on their devices in a remote setting with the secure browser, they use the same login interface appearance as ones who do in person. Okay, they're going to log in with their first name, their SSID, And then the session ID is going to appear on the next screen for them. They will verify their personal information and they will need to select the required test. And at this point, they will still be waiting for approval from their teacher before it begins. Once they're approved, they're going to complete the same series of audio-visual checks that they would if they were in person. And once a remote session is started and the students have joined, teachers can communicate with all students in the session through that broadcast feature within the RISE test administration site by selecting the megaphone icon. In the type a new message field, the teacher can type a message and then select the send icon, which will automatically then appear on the device of every single student in the session. Students do not need to do anything for this message to appear, but because we all know that students love a text and chat feature, it might be helpful to remind students that they do not need to individually reply to the broadcast messages unless you are going to request them to do so. Just know if you're expecting students to respond to any of your messaging, you're going to have up to 10 open chat boxes on your screen at the same time while also trying to proctor the test for the other students who are working. And while the majority of scripting is embedded in the system, there are also some scripted directions for test administration provided in the TAM. Students can again respond to the messages from the teacher by typing a message in the type new message field and then selecting the send icon on their devices. When a student sends a message, a little message waiting icon is going to appear under their image on the TA site. For a teacher to see the student's message, they then need to select the student's image and then that chat pop-up window is going to open. So when you're done reviewing the message, just click the X to close the chat and you'll return to that main screen. And you can also respond if necessary. With students testing off-site, teachers can observe video of all students at once in low resolution, or you can also select one student at a time to view at high resolution. Teachers can view that high resolution video of one student if they select the student video icon on the student that they wish to view. So the video conference pop-up window will appear displaying the high resolution video of the student. And as with any other application, you just click the X at the close in the corner if you want to close this video conference pop-up window at any time. If needed, you can also, though, initiate a video conference one at a time with a student as well. So during a video conference, teachers are going to be able to see and hear the student. And if you as the teacher allow, they will be able to see and hear you. Okay, you do this by selecting the student video icon for the student you need to speak with. That video conference pop-up window is going to open and display video of the student that we just looked at. But you can take it one step further by selecting the call icon to then be able to speak with the student. And once that call is initiated on the teacher's device, the pop-up window displays a split screen view of the teacher and the student. So on the student's device, the pop-up window displays automatically, displaying the same split screen view, and teachers can then toggle their webcam on and their microphone on or off using the buttons displayed at the top of the pop-up window. Students, though, do not have that functionality. They can, but they can disconnect the call at the bottom, just like you see on your phone, okay? Students who need assistance can request it from their teacher by virtually raising their hand. When this happens, they will appear at the top of your class list just for more effective monitoring. Students who need assistance are going to, again, appear with that hand raised icon next to their name on your student list on the test administration site, on that TA site. Teachers can then respond to student requests for assistance by either initiating a chat or a video like we just went over. When you open that video, you can chat with the student using your message option, or you can call the student like I'd shown you on the previous slides. You can also lower the student's hand once that communication is complete. But if a student's question requires a teacher to be able to view the student's screen, there is screen sharing functionality. So in the video conference pop-up window, the teacher will need to select the view icon and a prompt is going to appear if the student's pop-up window, it's going to ask them to give permission for the teacher to view their screen. And once the student selects the I agree box, the share your screen pop-up window will appear where the student then can specify if they want to share the entire screen or a particular window or a browser tab as applicable. With the secure browser, it's generally just the screen that is visible though. Once the student specifies which screen they want to share and selects that share button, the screen sharing functionality will begin and a red dashed border is going to appear around the student's screen when it's being shared with their teacher. The teacher is then able to view the student's screen. And there are two ways, though, if you need to ever end that screen share. The student can either select stop sharing on their screen, or the teacher can select the end icon in the video conferencing window. And just like in an in-person session, test alerts appear on the list of the student, if the RISE testing system has detected any activity from the student for a while, if their system may have gone a little silent. This may happen if a student's computer has gone to sleep, or if the student's experiencing some sort of interruption. In the event of a test alert, all student responses are saved, okay? There's no concern that students are going to lose their test data, but students with test alerts are automatically moved to a test with potential issues list at the top of the page. And you can respond to this in a myriad of ways. You can either select the student video icon for that student to see what might be going on in the testing environment. That means you can either send them a message or you can initiate that one-on-one video call with the student. But once all students submit their tests, teachers can then end that remote session. Okay. After the session is ended, or once an individual student logs out of the session, teachers and students no longer can see or communicate with each other. All right. So guidance then also needs to be provided to students prior to ending, since no communication within RISE will occur once a student submits their test. The submitting goes the very same way as it does for in-person students. But it's highly recommended that teachers and students using the RISE training test practice using the technology built into the remote administration system, especially with our younger students or first-time online learners. You don't want a third grader to not know that as soon as he submits his test, he doesn't get to talk to his teacher anymore. Okay. That's just another reason that using the training tests are so important, because it builds familiarity and comfort. Also note that stopping a session automatically logs out all of the students in the session, and it's going to pause any of them that weren't finished. So when you are in a remote setting, ending a session becomes even more paramount. So you don't want to end it until you either know that all students' tests have been paused or submitted, that all of those kiddos are in a safe and comfortable place with where they are in their testing process. Okay. Anyone who hasn't finished, though, just like an in-person session, can be resumed in a new session. You just need to, you would need to communicate with them the new session ID to be able to move forward with that if it was needed. Even with remote sessions, materials considered secure should be stored between assessment sessions and destroyed at the completion of the test, according to local procedures. This includes things like scratch paper, graph paper that was written on by students. If you sent testing tickets, so students participating in remote sessions are going to need specific guidance from you on how to handle that when they're done, because they're not in the classroom for you to do that for them. Okay. This is kind of like your RISE Help Desk one-stop shop. You'll notice the help desk extends their hours during our spring summative window, but otherwise the hours of operation are basically 8 to 5. Okay. And here you have all of the contact information for our USBE staff who work within the test administration, specifically along with their specialty that they work with. And with that, friends, we have reached the end of our RISE training, and I am still happy to stay on and answer any questions that you have, whether they are remote administration specific or other RISE questions that you have. Happy to hang out. But if you are comfortable and confident, you are good to drop off. And thank you so much for your attendance. I appreciate the amazing support that we get from our users in the field, especially our assessment directors. You guys are amazing. I love you.